talk about how at the end of the day, again, I'm talking about for people who want to get into politics, it's really, I'm sorry, it's not that hard. It's really not. It's personal. It's about people trusting you. It's about people liking you. You talked about Tip and Reagan building that relationship.
Having no memory.
And Bill Clinton talking about having no memory at all. And, you know, I was over my, years in Congress, I was always one of the most conservative members there with my ACU ratings, like 95, 96%. I never once walked into that chamber and sat on the Republican side. Never once. I went on the Democratic side, and I made friends with Ron Dellums and people that I had nothing in common with politically. Maxine Waters, I'd hug her on the floor. She'd scream,
she gets so mad.
"Get away from me. You're going to destroy my reputation in my district." But it was all about building personal relationships and letting people know they could trust you. Kevin McCarthy, I don't think he ever got that memo.
I'm glad you had me on this morning because, every morning for 6 years, a half dozen years, I got up with Speaker O'Neill, Tip O'Neill, the 10-year Speaker of the House. And he had two agendas. He had to decide what he's going to say that day, but he also, more importantly, had to decide what's going to be on the floor of the House. He decided what's going to come up, and he also decided what had to come up, like the continuing resolution and the debt ceiling. That's the combination you have to meet when you're Speaker. You have to agree to push things that are good and hold on to other things that are bad because you have to pass them. There's such a word as must. They should all have that in their mind. The problem with Matt Gaetz is that he became the Speaker of the House. He decided they were not going to do anything reasonable. They were going to shut down the government. They're going to impeach or try to impeach Joe Biden. They were going to cut off aid basically to Ukraine. All the bad stuff and all that the Speaker of the House had technically to do was to follow the orders of Matt Gaetz. And in other words, he yielded the power of the speakership to one guy from Florida. That's what he did. And once that was done, he was finished. And it was all written in the first 15 votes. And so he gave it away. And Matt Gaetz, there's only one guy laughing right now, guys, and that's Donald Trump. He got some schadenfreude yesterday because he got to see somebody else made a fool of. And also, Nancy Pelosi, one of the great speakers of modern times, and she's really good at things like finesse, how to tell the truth and work different groups, be honest with everybody, but work them with each other and put some people, time limit some people when they want to cause trouble, but get things done. And he took away a private office. I mean, give me a break. That was his last power move. I mean, give me a break. This guy's not a leader.
Yeah. You know, Brendan, tell me if maybe I'm too naive, but I still think at the end of the day, it's knowing how to work with people and knowing how to work people. And Kevin McCarthy could have done a deal with Democrats. He could have gotten 6, 7, 8, 9 people. Everybody's saying, well, he couldn't do that or else he would have faced even more problems from his own side. Well, there are subtle ways to do things. You don't have to always get in front of microphones. I'm just curious, do you think there was any way for Kevin McCarthy, if he had built up these relationships and had the trust, to have survived yesterday? Or do you think he was doomed from the second he agreed to that rule change?
In some ways, I think he was doomed. But I do want to give Kevin McCarthy credit. Going back years, he did have lots of great relationships with Democrats. He's one of the most, as you know, most affable people in the House. The problem is when he decided he wanted to become Speaker of the House, he had to become a new person. And he has spent basically every moment since Paul Ryan left office making sure that he was in position to get that gavel whenever Republicans took back the House. That's, of course, going down to Mar-a-Lago. It's all the promises that he made. And all of those things he had to do to become a Republican Speaker of the House, burned all those bridges that he had with Democrats. He had a lot of great relationships with Democrats. He would go on bike rides with Democrats, all kinds of stuff like that. But that kind of stuff is just, it's a fireable offense to be a Republican Speaker these days. And so none of that held up. He obviously, those relationships didn't hold up. And it's because of all of the things that you have to do now. to get the job, and whoever is next is going to have to do all of those very same things. I don't think this gets any better. Democrats, I understand why they didn't want to save Kevin McCarthy. If you look at this as a vote about Kevin McCarthy, I get it. But this was also a vote about Matt Gaetz. You just empowered Matt Gaetz to take over the House and basically choose the next speaker to say, we're not going to fund Ukraine. We're going to impeach Joe Biden. All of those things are going to be demands that whoever is next is going to have to make.
Yeah, and Claire, that was my question to you, which is why is there any reason to believe this gets better with, say, Steve Scalise or Jim Jordan or whoever gets this job next? The predicate has been laid. Matt Gaetz now knows that even though it's just him and about 9 or 11 other people of 435, they hold the power. As long as this rule is in place, they can extract whatever they want, including getting rid of the next speaker.
Well, I think you're still going to see chaos, and if the rule gets changed, that will make a big difference. But whoever is running for speaker needs to remember the 4 cardinal rules of serving in a legislative body. Number 1 is keep your word. Number 2 is keep your word. Number 3 is be able to count votes. Number 4 is negotiate if you don't have the votes, but never from a position of weakness. So those are the 4 rules, and Kevin McCarthy, violated all of them. If he knew he didn't have the votes going into that vote yesterday, why in the world wouldn't he have negotiated then for a different speaker and figured out a way to turn over the speakership in a classy way without having to be publicly embarrassed and have history always remember him as the only speaker removed from office by his own party? And I think whoever's running for speaker is going to have to address whether or not they're willing to shut down the government. And if this person gets elected being willing to shut down the government, then all of those Republican House members that won in Biden districts are toast. They're done. It's over.
And it can't be shorthanded, Mike, that it's the House in chaos. It's the Republicans in the House who are in chaos. And this is indeed a historic moment. And a telling one, I think, about where this Republican Party stands, the party of Trump, the party in which the White House and Democrats are eager to draw contrasts from. So just tell us from your perspective, just what does this moment mean right now about the House of Representatives, but more than that, the Republican Party?
I would hesitate to disagree with you, Jonathan, on one element. All of what you said is accurate. There's a larger casualty than the House, than the chaos in the House, than the lack of governing in the House, and it's the country, our country, the United States of America. The Speaker of the House is a constitutional officer. A lot of people think it's an elected political officer. Chris Matthews knows it's a constitutional officer. It's in line to become president, the Speaker of the House, whoever the Speaker of the House is. So today in this country, I was thinking about Tip O'Neill yesterday, and Chris reminded me of the great tipster this morning. And Chris, I could imagine someone walking into the Speaker's office today, Speaker Thomas P. O'Neill, going in to see him and saying, Mr. Speaker, Tom, they would call him because they would know him and get in there. Tom, I've got to tell you that the child care funding, the pandemic relief money has expired. And there are people in 41 states in this country right now, today, who can't afford child care for 2 children. And the cost of child care for 2 children in their states, 41 out of our 50 states, the cost of that child care exceeds the average annual monthly mortgage payment for the average American. And they can't find the child care if they had the money. Tom, what can we do about it? You tell us what Tip O'Neill's instincts would be to hear a story like that.
Well, I always thought that was the real difference between the biography of Ronald Reagan and the biography of Tip O'Neill. If you're in Hollywood, you're fighting with other actors, you're fighting with directors, trying to get jobs, trying to hold on to your career. If you're in North Cambridge, the working class part, the Irish-Italian part of Cambridge, not the Harvard part, the regular part, you're dealing with people every day with problems like that. I remember Tip when he was all the gold diggers and all the right wingers were saying, "Why do you care about these social programs?" And he would say, "You know what? I even care about the dwarf program." He had the Massachusetts accent. He'd say, "The dwarfs," and he'd say, "We can get these guys to go from 3'6" to 4'2," and that's a big difference. And we got to look out for the dwarfs. And he would go through all the women's breast care diseases, and he knew all about them. And he'd always be rooting for these people because everybody knew about Tip O'Neill, and the reason it saved him through everything was he cares about the little guy, the person at the bottom. That's who he is. Now, who's McCarthy? What does he care about mainly? Mainly saving his job. That's what everybody knew. So Matt Gaetz said, "I'm going to hold you up for your job. If it takes one vote, I'm going to get rid of you, you bum." And that's what worked. But with Tip, you'd have to take him on his values. And his values where everybody knew were his strength. They said, "Okay, you're old school, but look, he cares about regular people." And I'm telling you, you got to have something in your heart that the average politician would say, "I'm not messing with him on that because I know he cares about it."